She was 19 years old and she had $47 in her pocket and nowhere to sleep. Not a friend's couch, not a shelter bed, not a car, just $47, a duffel bag with a broken zipper held shut by a binder clip, and the name of a county road she had found on a photocopied flyer stapled to a corkboard at the public library. The flyer said, Bridge House, Harlan Creek Crossing, $1. As is. Inquire within. She had torn the bottom tab off with the phone number, folded it twice, and tucked it into her sock. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, she had walked 11 miles to see it. Nobody told her it was beautiful. Nobody told her it was safe. The man at the county assessor's office, she had stopped there before she walked out to the road, had looked at the address she showed him, looked at her, and then back at the address, and said, "Hon, that's not a house. That's a structure classified as a habitation-adjacent crossing facility, built in 1911. Condemned in 1989. You don't want it." She thanked him, folded the paper back into her pocket, and walked. What she found inside the lantern room at the top of that bridge house was going to shake her to her core. But that is near the end of this story, and to understand what it meant, you need to know where she started. If this is the kind of story that means something to you, this channel is made for you. Subscribe if you'd like. It costs nothing and it tells us to keep going. And if you want to say hello, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Her name was Mara Sutcliffe, and she had grown up in a town called Greers Hollow, population 812, on the eastern edge of a county most people drove through without stopping. Her mother Diane had died when Mara was 11, a Tuesday in November, a blood clot that gave no warning. Her father, Gerald Sutcliffe, had not cried at the funeral. He had stood at the graveside in a gray suit and looked at the middle distance, and when the service ended, he had walked back to the car without waiting for Mara. She had run to catch up, her good shoes skidding on the frost-stiff grass, and when she reached the passenger door it was already locked. He unlocked it without looking at her. That was the first day of the version of her life that led to the road. Gerald was not a violent man. He was something colder. He managed a hardware supply depot, kept a clean house, and fed her, and that was the list of things he did for her. She cooked her own meals by 12. She did her own laundry by 9. She learned to be invisible in a way that felt like survival, because invisibility meant she was not in the way, and not being in the way meant he didn't tighten his jaw and leave the room. She had one teacher, a woman named Mrs. Oglesby, who taught English at the middle school, who once said to her, "You have a good mind, Mara. Don't waste it." Mara wrote that down in a notebook, and kept the notebook under her mattress for 7 years. When she was 16, her father married a woman named Patrice. Patrice had 2 children of her own, a boy of 12 and a girl of 9, and they moved into the house in Greers Hollow with the kind of settled certainty that left no room for adjustment. Mara's bedroom was repainted for the girl. Her things were boxed and moved to the basement. She was told, in a sentence so flat it sounded almost reasonable, that the girl needed natural light. Patrice did not say this unkindly. That was what made it so hard to argue with. She said it the way you would say a fence needs painting, a fact, not a cruelty. Mara slept in the basement for 3 years. She finished high school. She got a job at a laundromat, then a job stocking shelves at a grocery store that closed at 10. She saved money in a coffee can she kept behind the water heater. By the time she turned 19, she had $212 in that coffee can. She had plans. Loose ones, but real. The week after her 19th birthday, she came home from a late shift to find her can gone from behind the water heater. She checked twice. She checked the shelf above it and the shelf beside it. She went upstairs and asked her father directly, asked him standing in the kitchen doorway at 11 at night, still in her work apron, and he told her, without putting down his glass, that they'd needed it for the septic repair, that the money in the basement had been sitting there, and they'd assumed she'd understand. "You're 19 now," he said. "It's time to figure out your own arrangements." He didn't say it angry. That was the thing. He said it the way the county man would later say the Bridge house wasn't a real house. He said it like a fact. She left 2 days later. She took the duffel bag. She left everything else. She had $47 of her own, tips she'd been keeping in her apron pocket instead of the can, and a binder clip, and a name on a paper tab in her sock, and 11 miles of county road between her and a $1 property that a man with a desk job had told her she didn't want. She wanted it. She didn't know why. She wanted something that was hers and only hers, even if it was broken, even if it was falling down, even if it was a structure classified as a habitation-adjacent crossing facility, even if it had no heat and no working water and a condemned notice tacked to its door in 1989. She saw it for the first time on a Thursday in late October at 4 in the afternoon, when the light was coming sideways through the bare trees along Harlan Creek. The bridge itself was a covered wooden structure, 46 feet long, built to cross a creek that ran strong in spring and quiet in fall. The house, the habitation-adjacent crossing facility, was built into the bridge at its center, a small room that had served as the toll-keeper's station in 1911, with a second floor that jutted up above the roofline of the bridge's timber frame and held a glass-paneled lantern room at its peak, the kind of small windowed cupola that had once shown a light to warn night travelers that the creek crossing was ahead. The glass in the lantern room was intact. She noticed that first. Every pane, intact. A small miracle in a structure that had been empty since the 80s. The rest of it was less miraculous. 2 boards on the western wall of the lower room had rotted through and been colonized by something she didn't look too closely at. The stairs to the second floor were sound on the left side and soft on the right. The floor of the upper room had a buckle in the center that she tested with her foot before committing any weight. The lantern room door, a small low door she had to duck to pass through, was sealed shut with 30 years of swelled wood and oxidized hinges. She stood in the lower room for a long time. It was 16 feet by 12 feet. A cast iron stove in the corner, still bolted to the floor, its pipe collars still seated in the wall, the pipe itself long gone. A shelf along the north wall with 3 hooks below it, the kind of hooks you hang coats on. 2 windows facing the creek, their glass filmed with 40 years of particulate matter, but unbroken. The floor was wide plank, oak, she thought, though she didn't know for certain yet, and solid except for 2 boards near the stove that gave slightly underfoot. A woman could live here. It was cold. It was filthy. It was condemned. A woman could live here. She paid the $1 on a Friday, in cash, at the county office. The clerk had accepted it with the kind of carefully neutral expression that meant she was working to keep a straight face. She handed Mara a deed, a single page, notarized, and said, "You understand the structure has no certificate of occupancy." Mara said she understood. "And there are no utilities." Mara said she understood that too. "And the creek floods in spring. The bridge has held for 113 years, but the creek floods." Mara said she understood. She signed her name. She was given a key, a real key, heavy, old, the kind cut for a lock that was probably also older than most living people, and she walked back out into the October afternoon with a deed in her duffel bag and $46 to her name. There was a man sitting on the bridge railing when she returned. He was 70-something, in canvas work pants and a flannel shirt, with the look of someone who'd lived in this county long enough to remember when it had a different name. He was watching the creek. He didn't appear startled by her arrival. "You the one who bought it?" he said. "Yes." He looked at the structure, then back at the water. "Used to know the man who lived here." Elias Gruntke. Died in '86. Lived here 30 years before that. What happened to it after? County took it. Nobody wanted it. He glanced at her. Until now, I suppose. His name was Vern Caulfield. He lived a quarter-mile down the road, on a property that had been his family's since his grandfather cleared it. He had a barn that he used for storing equipment, and, it turned out, a collection of hand tools he hadn't touched in years, which he offered her the use of with the casualness of a man who had decided to be generous before he even introduced himself. Elias would have wanted it fixed up, he said. He was particular about it. Kept it neat. A woman named Dot Reyes ran the small hardware and feed store 8/10 of a mile up the county road. She was 59, had owned the store since her husband passed, and had the manner of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by things. When Mara came in with a list and $46, Dot looked at the list, looked at the $46, and said, "I know where this is going. The Bridge House." Mara said yes. Dot said, Elias used to come in every Friday for 30 years. He always paid for whatever the person behind him needed if they looked like they were doing the math. She paused. Let's see what we can do with $46. They got further than Mara expected. Linseed oil for the boards. A can of rust treatment for the stove fittings. Rope caulk for the window frames. A box of 16 penny nails. A brush. Dot took $4 off the total without explanation and put the receipt in the bag herself. Mara slept in the lower room that night in her sleeping bag with her duffel bag as a pillow. She could hear the creak below her through the boards of the bridge deck. It was cold. It was the best sleep she had gotten in 3 years. She worked on the house through November and into December. She was still working at the grocery store. She had arranged with the manager to keep her shifts while she sorted out transportation, which meant she walked the 8/10 of a mile to the road, caught the county bus at 6:15, and reversed the trip at 10:30 at night. She bought a propane camp stove with her first paycheck from the new arrangement, and a used sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees from a thrift store in the next town. She ate oatmeal and canned soup and biscuits she made on the camp stove. She fixed the rotted boards. She treated the stove. She caulked the windows. Vern came by twice a week and often brought things. A cast-iron skillet, he said, was taking up room, a wool blanket, once a small bag of apples from a tree in his yard. He did not make a production of any of it. He set the thing down, said something about Elias or the creek or the weather, and left. Mara thanked him each time, and he waved it off each time, as if the thanks were beside the point. It was Vern who told her about the lantern room. She had been trying to get the door open for 3 weeks. It was not a priority. The upper room was useful as storage, and the lantern room beyond the low door was too small to live in, but she was methodical by nature, and the sealed door bothered her the way an unfinished sentence bothers a reader. She'd worked the hinges with penetrating oil, and tried the door twice a week, and it had moved perhaps a 1/4 inch and no further. Vern watched her work on it one afternoon in December, the 5th of December, a Thursday, while he sat on the upper room's one sound chair and drank from a thermos he'd brought. Elias used that room, he said. For what? I don't know exactly. He went up there most evenings. Never said why. When we asked, he just said it was where he thought. He looked at the door. After he died, the county sealed it. Said it was a liability. I always thought there was more to it. She tried the door again that evening, alone after Vern had gone. She had refilled the hinges with oil for the 4th time, and she wrapped her hands in a cloth for grip, and she leaned her shoulder into it and pushed, not a sudden shove, but a sustained, steady pressure. Letting the wood give at its own pace, the door moved. 1 inch, 2 inches. Then, with a sound like a long breath released, it swung inward. If you have been with this story from the beginning, thank you for staying. If you haven't subscribed yet and you'd like to, it means a great deal to this channel. Now, what she found in that room. The lantern room was 6 feet across, 8 panes of glass on 4 sides, all intact, as she had noticed from the ground. A small round table, roughly 2 feet in diameter, bolted to the floor at the center. And on the table, not in a box, not locked away, simply set there as if left for an evening and not yet retrieved, a wooden case, roughly the size of a large book, with a brass clasp. She stood in the door for a moment. The creek was silver below her in the December dusk. The trees along the bank were black against a sky that hadn't made up its mind between blue and purple. The glass was cold, but the room held the last of the day's warmth in a way the lower room didn't, trapped in the glass like something saved. She crossed to the table. She opened the clasp. Inside the case were 34 savings passbooks. Passbooks, the kind issued by savings institutions before ATM cards and online accounts, the kind you brought in and had stamped, the kind that recorded every deposit and every withdrawal in a column of handwritten figures. 34 of them. They spanned from 1954 to 1985. They were organized by year, bound in groups with rubber bands that had long since gone brittle. The name on every account was Elias Arthur Grundke. The last passbook had a balance recorded on February 14, 1985, a date she would come to find meaningful, of $41,700. She sat down on the floor of the lantern room because her legs had made that decision for her. She sat with the passbooks in her lap, and the creek below her, and the darkening sky on all 4 sides, and she thought about Elias Grundke, who had lived here 30 years and gone to the hardware store every Friday and paid for what the person behind him needed if they looked like they were doing the math, and who had come up to this room every evening to think, and who had died in 1986 and left behind a passbook that had never been claimed. She found the will 2 days later beneath a loose board in the lower room that she had noted as needing attention but hadn't gotten to yet. It was in a tin box, sealed with a twist of wire. She opened it at the table with Vern beside her, because something in her had known she wanted a witness. The will was handwritten, 4 pages, dated January of 1986. It was witnessed by 2 people, whose signatures she couldn't fully read. It left the property and everything in it to whoever comes next, whoever sees worth in what others have let go. There was a letter clipped to the last page addressed to whoever you are. She read it aloud because Vern's eyes weren't what they had been. It said, "I have watched this crossing for 30 years. I have never seen anyone come to it without a reason. Not the fishermen, not the children, not the road crews, and not you. If you are reading this, you had a reason. Whatever brought you here is yours, and not my business. But I want you to know that this place is built to hold weight. The creek has tried it 100 years, and it is still here. So are you, or you wouldn't be reading this. The money is real. It is in the banks listed in the passbooks. The accounts have been dormant. You will need a lawyer, and it will take time. I'm sorry for that part. But I left it here because I believed someone would come who needed it more than the county did. Buy yourself something warm. Pay for the person behind you whenever you can." That's all I ever found that worked. The rest was a list of the account numbers in the banks, all local, all still operating. Mara counted them twice. The total across all 34 passbooks in 1985 dollars was $41,700. With 30 years of dormancy interest, the lawyer she eventually hired, a woman named Carol Bibb, who drove out from the county seat and sat at the small table in the lower room on a Tuesday in January, estimated the total could be considerably more. It was. It took 4 months of probate and documentation, and one very long conversation with a state banking authority, and when it was done, the amount was $68,412. A number so specific it didn't feel real until it was in her account, and she looked at it 3 times before believing it. She stayed at the Bridge House. That was the first decision she made with the money. She hired a contractor, a man named Pete Gruber, who worked out of a shop 12 miles up the road, and she told him what she wanted: sound walls, a working chimney for the iron stove, a bathroom addition on the eastern bank side, running water from the well that had been capped at the property line since 1987. Pete looked at the structure, walked it twice, went quiet in the way that meant he was doing math, and said, "I can do this." He did it for $22,000, which included a new staircase, reinforced decking on the bridge floor, and weatherproofing that made the lower room genuinely warm by February. He was a plain-spoken man. He didn't ask why she wanted the bridge house in particular, or what her plans were. He asked about the cast iron stove, about whether she wanted the pipe collar patched or replaced, about what gauge wire she wanted for the bathroom addition. He treated the project the way she had come to prefer things treated, as a thing to be done, not a story to be explained. On the third day of work, when he discovered that the eastern wall studs were sounder than they'd looked from outside, he told her straight away, because it meant she could have a slightly larger bathroom than she'd planned. She appreciated that. She approved the change on the spot. Pete brought an apprentice some days, a young man of about 20 named Callum, who hardly spoke at first but who over the weeks of the job began to ask her questions, small ones, about how she'd found the place, about the lantern room, about whether the creek really flooded in spring the way people said. She answered him honestly. He told her he'd grown up in the county and had passed this bridge 100 times on the school bus and had never once known anyone lived in it. "I used to think it was a ghost house," he said. "My grandmother said Old Man Gruntke was in there, but she said it like a story, like he wasn't real." Mara had thought about that. Elias Gruntke had been real enough to keep 34 savings passbooks and write 4 pages by hand and leave a letter to a person he would never meet. She kept working at the grocery store through the winter. She didn't tell her manager why her circumstances had changed. She worked her shifts, walked the county road in the mornings, took the bus home at night. Dot at the hardware store noticed the contractor's truck on the property and stopped by one afternoon. Mara made coffee on the camp stove. The kitchen wasn't finished yet, and they sat on the bridge railing where Vern had been sitting on the day she arrived, and Mara told her about the passbooks. Dot was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He was paying for people's things for 30 years, at the store. I didn't know where the money came from. I just thought he was generous." "He was," Mara said. Dot looked at the creek. "He used to say it didn't cost much to make sure the person behind you got what they needed." She shook her head slowly. "I haven't thought about that in years." Dot stayed for an hour. She told Mara things she hadn't known. That Elias had once brought a bag of firewood to a family on the north end of the county during a winter when the father was laid up. That he had, on at least 3 occasions she knew of, driven elderly neighbors to their doctor appointments 30 miles away and refused money for the gas. That he had kept a jar on his workbench in the bridge house. She had seen it once, years ago, when she'd stopped to leave a delivery, with a handwritten label that said the next person. She didn't know what the jar had held. She'd assumed small tools, maybe, or spare change. Mara thought about the jar for a long time after Dot left. She thought she understood what it had held. She told Dot that she'd started doing the same thing as the Friday habit. The Friday before, she had paid for the groceries of a woman behind her in line at the store who was doing the math on her items and had quietly put 2 things back. The woman had looked at her, startled, and Mara had said only, "Someone did it for me first." She hadn't elaborated. She called her father in March. She did not call him to tell him about the money. She called him to say that she was well and that she didn't need anything. It was a short call. He said, "Are you working?" She said yes. He said, "Good." Patrice said something in the background that she couldn't make out. She said goodbye and hung up and sat at her table, the small round bolted table from the lantern room, which she had moved to the finished kitchen. and felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't known was still waiting to settle. Word got out, the way word does in small counties. Not the full story. People knew she'd bought the bridge house for $1 and that she'd done it up. They knew she was the young woman who sometimes paid for things at the checkout without being asked. They knew she and Vern were on speaking terms, and that Dot at the hardware store had started a small thing where if a customer was a few dollars short, the store would cover it and chalk it up to the Friday account, though nobody had given it that name officially. It was Vern who heard from Patrice first. Not directly. Vern knew someone who knew someone. The way it works in small towns. And what he heard was that Patrice and Gerald had heard about the bridge house renovation and the money, and that Patrice had told her sister that Mara must have had help from somewhere, that a 19-year-old girl didn't find $68,000 in a condemned building just by showing up. Vern reported this to Mara without drama. Wanted you to know, in case it came to you some other way, he said. It never came to her any other way. No phone call, no letter, no visit. She imagined, once, that she might feel something sharp at that, a satisfaction, a vindication, a wish that they could see her sitting in the lantern room in the evening light with the creek below her and the accounts settled. But what she felt instead was mostly nothing, a kind of quiet, the kind that comes when you've walked 11 miles to a place and it turns out to be exactly where you were supposed to be. She was 21 when the work was fully done. She had a kitchen and a bathroom and a bedroom in the upper room, the buckled floor replaced, the stairs rebuilt on both sides now, and the lantern room above it, which she did not use as a bedroom but as Elias had used it, as a place to go in the evenings, to sit at the table and think. She bought a small lamp. She bought a good chair. She bought a wool blanket from the same thrift store she'd gotten the sleeping bag from, because some spending decisions feel right when they're continuous. She put $14,000 in a savings account she didn't touch. She used a portion to pay off a small debt she owed. She gave Vern a sum of money she had decided on after 3 weeks of thinking, and when he tried to decline it, she said, "You don't get to refuse. This is from Elias, not me." He took it. He cried a little. He said Elias would have liked her. She thought that was the finest thing anyone had ever said to her. She went back to the grocery store on a Tuesday morning and gave her notice, and the manager said she was sorry to lose her, and Mara said she was grateful for the work. She meant it. She took a job as an office administrator at a small land trust organization in the county seat, work that turned out to suit her. Methodical, detail-oriented, concerned with land and records and the quiet work of preserving things. She was good at it. Her supervisor, within 6 months, said Mara had a good mind. She did not write it down. She already knew. The lantern room became known, in a gentle way, as the place she did her thinking. Vern had started telling people about Elias, about the Friday habit, about the years of careful saving, about the letter, and the story moved through the county the way good stories do, getting slightly bigger with each telling but keeping its shape. People drove out to see the bridge sometimes. She didn't mind. The creek was worth seeing. Some things are built to hold more weight than they look like they can. The bridge had proven that for 113 years, a plank and timber structure spanning a creek that swelled every spring and quieted every fall, and it had held because the people who built it in 1911 had known that what matters is the foundation and not the finish. That you build for the weight that's coming, not for the weight you can already see. Mara had learned something similar on a Tuesday in the public library when she had torn a paper tab from a corkboard. She had not known what she was building toward. She had only known that $47 and a broken zipper and 11 miles of county road were what she had, and that she should go. She was 19 years old and she had $47 in her pocket and nowhere to sleep, and she found a door that someone had left open for her, sealed shut with 30 years of swelled wood and time, waiting for someone who would lean into it slowly and let it open at its own pace. She still goes up to the lantern room most evenings. The creek is silver when the light is right. The glass is old and wavy, and it makes the trees look like they're moving even when there's no wind. She sits at the bolted table with her lamp and her wool blanket, and sometimes she brings her coffee, and she thinks. The way Elias did. In the place he left. If this story found something in you, we'd love it if you'd subscribe. It's how this channel keeps going, and it genuinely means something to us every time. And we have one question for you tonight, the kind we'd love you to answer in the comments. Has there ever been a moment when something that seemed worthless turned out to be exactly what you needed? A place, a job, a person, something left behind by someone you never got to thank? Tell us, if you're willing. We read every one. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'll see you in the next one.